us on our of our final evening of Beltline live stream with our Scholar-in-Residence Nedra Deadwyler. And so Nedra is a public historian from Atlanta. Her approach centers Black, Indigenous, and POC voices in how we talk about place and history. She's the founder and principal of Civil Bikes, a preservation and heritage tour company based in Atlanta, Georgia. She received a Master of Social Work from New York University, a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Georgia, and is in pursuit of a Master of Heritage Preservation from Georgia State University. She is a fellow at the Center for Civic Innovation, and she has published a chapter, Civil Bikes, Embracing Atlanta's Racialized History Through Bicycle Tours. She has 2 book reviews under her belt, Whose Bike Lanes and Bike Lanes Are White Lanes, Urban Planning and Bicycle Infrastructure and Advocacy, and has published in Bicycle Magazine with her article, There is a Tremendous Untold Story of Black People on Bikes. She's presented at conferences across the country, and she is low-key famous in Atlanta. And she's recently started a consulting practice, so if you need her, now is your chance before she is entirely too cool for any of us to ever email or call her ever again. And so without further ado, I will hand it over to Nedra, who will walk us through what her work has entailed with us at the Beltline over the last year. At the end of the conversation, we'll open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Miranda, for the introduction and the welcome. Hope everyone's feeling comfortable, and you probably are because you're at home, possibly. But as Miranda said, I am the scholar in residence at the Beltline this year with the Art in the Beltline program, which is really led by Miranda and Chris. And I just have to give them a big thank you for this past year, for the support and the challenge. I feel like it was a great opportunity to learn and to practice some of my public history skills and to learn more about the city where we live. So without further ado, I really would like to just kind of ground us in what my proposal was about first, and then we'll move towards what actually took place. So my initial goal was to explore the cultural landscapes, historic memory, as well as transportation. Since the Beltline is a transportation corridor, right now it's largely been centered around biking and walking. However, the light rail is coming soon. So and in case you do not know what a cultural landscape is, it could be, it's based on land use, it's based on spatial organization, it's based on, like where things are placed. So looking at the neighborhoods that are along the Beltline, what were they? Where were they located? And then also who were the people who lived there? And being able to look at some of that historical memory, which really comes from, oral histories. It comes from reading different articles and artifacts, and some of that is in the historical record. And then thinking through transportation and how it intersects both of those things. So I wanted to see how they influenced each other. Also think about what is significant about each of those pieces that could help us think about the future Atlanta, where we're going in the city. How should we think about design? How should we think about what we want to remember? And another feature of cultural landscape, it's a collective activity. So it's based on how we all identify what we find significant. So within this project, that meant that it was necessary to engage people. As you know, we were in a period of something called COVID, a global pandemic, which made engaging others really difficult. However, we found ways to do that. I want to share some of the experiences or thinking that led me to this. It wasn't just about conversations that I had with people on bike tours. That includes people in communities, at some of the museums or cultural spaces that we visited, or in the businesses that we stopped at. but it was also just like going into the archives or going into a bookstore or just random conversations with people, even in a digital space about history, right? One of the things that happened in 2019, in case you didn't hear it, it's very significant. The Museum of Chinese in America caught on fire. It's located in the heart of Chinatown in New York City, and it was really devastating. Having lived in New York, and then also reading about the story of the museum and how it was founded, it really knocked me in the heart. And it's because the two men who founded the museum, basically they walked out of their houses and they looked around them and they noticed that on the street, in the trash can, in suitcases that were going to the landfill, littered about on the street, it was their cultural heritage. Those artifacts that in public historian terms, it's called material culture. That was their history. And instead of being somewhere in a museum or in an archive, it was going into the trash. And in my family, we've lost a number of elders, not only this past year, but in the past couple of years. And when they left, a lot of their material culture, if it didn't end up in one of our homes, it also went into the trash. So that set me to thinking, deeper about that. One of the things that I guess like themes of the book too, which kind of shifted a little bit. It wasn't just looking at Black communities. I really wanted to focus on Black working people as well as Black working neighborhoods, just because largely in the historical narrative, working communities, working people aren't necessarily centered in history. I mean, there are some accounts that are there. You look at the washerwomen's strike in 1881, where starting out with 20 women grew to over 3,000 women in a period of 3 weeks. This trade union became very influential in not only increasing their pay, they also gained more autonomy and really kind of set the tone for how they should be treated as, domestic workers, laundress, which were really underpaid and disrespected. So that's a great story, but do we know much about their individual lives? And that's a lingering question. We can talk about that later. And then, like in the civil rights movement, a lot of working people helped to make the movement what it was. But again, we largely do not know of their stories or even their names. And this just happened to be an image of a carpool that was the Atlanta Negro Voters League, which was held up by John Wesley Dobbs and A.T. Walden, pulled that together to expand Black voting power in Atlanta. There are a list of names, even addresses that you can find, but rarely do we have that kind of information. So, and then the third thing that really helped me to, I guess, be on my way with this research, because it was one during like a highly kind of emotional time and just a lot of change and uncertainty in the world. It was this quote by Toni Morrison. I think she's a thinker. Of course, she's a writer, but a thinker and also a moral compass for how we can think about race, how we can think about how we tell our stories and narratives. And it helped me to really direct what I wanted to say in this paper. And basically in this quote, she is saying that that she was asked why did she not include white characters in her narratives, and she was like, there are no major white players in her work, and it's because that's not how she lived her life, and that's not how Black communities lived. And so it also helped me to refocus even how I think historically, and who I am centering, not only in the story, but from the perspective that it's being told. And it helped me to, I think, change from basing how I talk about history, how I talk about narratives, to redirected on the BIPOC character and from a BIPOC character's perspective. So Miranda gave you a little bit about who I am. I'll also just add that I'm a Southerner, you know, I'm a sister, I'm a child, I'm an auntie. I am a social worker. I was a social worker first. I really believe in advocacy, and a lot of what Civil Bikes was about was advocating for BIPOC stories, right? And also for women, for queer folk, for immigrants, because a lot of times, you know, just like in the historical narrative, we're not only erased, is actually, I saw a quote this week that was in a repost on the New Georgia Project's website from someone's Twitter. We're saying that we're not erased, but we're historically excluded. So, and that is another way of thinking about, like, what does radical inclusion look like? It means that we are centering our stories and our narratives on people who have not been really a part of the story at all. So the concept, grounding in those themes or ideas, it really takes place in 7 different neighborhoods along the Beltline, and even say neighborhoods that are clustered around them. We'll say we start with the Old Fourth Ward, Reynoldstown, Pittsburgh, Summerhill, Peoplestown, Carver Homes, which is over on, or the former Carver Homes, now the Villages of Carver Homes, over on Pryor Street, Washington Park, and Murphy Crossing, I think is the other one. So it's just going, that is the location. And the way that I kind of moved through this, I used my public history tools, interviewed 5 different individuals and who currently reside in one of these neighborhoods. One neighborhood features, I guess, a personal connection or a personal story, my story. And these were individuals that I know. All of them are probably under 50, at least under 55. And they were people that I have known or encountered through my work. Research, largely scholarly articles, journal articles, some magazines, and digital archives. And and just recently I was able to go to Auburn Avenue Research Library, and because they were open again, we could do that in person. It was nice to really touch some artifacts, and this is a picture here from like a self-guided tour. The other part that was not only great about this project, but I will say this project helped me to develop a praxis for myself. And through the conversation with my fearless leaders, it's education, it's advocacy, practice, and engagement. You know, it's highly relational, not only in the interviews, but also in just pulling in other narratives and stories. And I'll talk more about that as we continue. Just a little bit about challenges. Just wanted to re-mention again the pandemic, not that we're out of it, but that really was the start of even why I searched out this opportunity, because I was looking for a way to keep myself busy and also to continue developing, over this past year. But you know, there was a toll on everyone. And it also kind of hindered who I was able to contact for interviews. I wanted to get to some seniors, but that was prohibitive. But there's some future work and future plans that I have in mind to continue that work. So just going through rethinking narratives. And these are definitely images from the Auburn Avenue Research Library, which is one reason why it's always good to be able to, you know, go to an archive to see different types of document. These are illustrations by, sorry, can't read right now, but illustrations, and it just kind of shows you a few are narrative and goes through different uprisings. This is looking at cotton and Black workers in cotton. And I'm not sure if this is post-slavery or doing slavery, as the industry of cotton actually continues to today. And then there's this one diagram of illustration of like the happy plantation. And it just shows you how and why narratives is important. If that was the only image that was left post, if we didn't have like slave narratives, if we didn't have writings from people like Frederick Douglass or I think his name is, Brown, something, who stored himself away in a box. If we didn't have these narratives to refer to, we would think that that was the way things were. However, by being able to give space for Black voice, it helps to really inform where we are right now, where we've been, and where we're going. I just kind of go through a little bit more of an event that took place over this past weekend, and then kind of tell you some of my learnings, and then we can have some Q&A. But this weekend we had the only pop-up of my residency. And basically it was an opportunity to put into practice some of my praxis and what tools I would want to use or will use ongoing as I am engaging community around like story, historical, cultural landscapes, historic memory, what is significant, what do they find significant in their own neighborhoods. This was a framework that I developed, and it was really inspired by landscape architect professor at a school in North Carolina, Kofi Boone. He had some events at a trail that he helped to create in North Carolina. And basically there are some interactives where people can share their story. Questions like, since we're on transportation, what is your bike story? Looking at how people enter into transportation, some of the themes that may come up for them. And some of the interviews, there were, actually most of them talked about transportation, either the theme of the use of trail systems, not only for their own personal freedom and liberation, but for their children, as a way of using for, being able to access work, being able to use this and take ownership of it. There's also conversation around public transportation and what it provided for. One person was a canvasser for a political, for someone's political, their run for office, and she used public transportation, and it took her across the city from walking to taking public transportation. Really changed her perspective of the topography of Atlanta, as well as the people and the culture that was here. It was very informative. Even as a person who was from here, it really opened up her eyes to a lot of the story. There's also, we had some a digital tour, so that a self-guided digital tour, so that people can go and visit some of the, it's already identified as significant in the neighborhood. The Fourth Ward has 3 historic designated spaces: the King National Park, the Auburn Avenue Historic District, and the Sweet Auburn Historic District, which refers to the commercial district. We had one partner to join us, and this is Shannon Douglas Kimbrough. She is a conservator for the city of Atlanta, and her outdoor classroom was to share knowledge so that people can do a good job of taking care of their own family heritage, their own cultural heritage, and be able to pass it on to the next generation. From how to take care of prints to care for metal, photographs, all of that. So there is a way that we all do it, but there's a way to do it better so that so that things last and move on. Yeah, so that things last. And I also have a co-created curriculum that's looking at preserving history, and is taking, it's a 4-part series that take folks through the process of story, narrative, identifying what's significant in a neighborhood, and the process to get local designation. So it's a little bit of education, practice, and advocacy tied into one. And oops. Some of the conclusions of my research is thinking through ways to use culture to transform and to heal. We are Atlanta, so Kofi Boone has identified several different, and it's printed here, different Black landscapes. He has a talk called Black Landscapes Matter, and he identified them as being like historically Black colleges, Black settlements, Black Wall Street or Main Street. There are 2 of those, that's Auburn Avenue, historic Hunter Avenue, which is MLK Boulevard or Drive now. These are spaces where, or public, public housing could be one of them. Atlanta had both built and also demolished, was first to demolish all of the public housing in Atlanta. And it's the idea of that these spaces are significant in who we are as a city, who we are as a people, whether we know it or not. These spaces have made significant contributions to the culture, to the vibrancy, to the economic viability of the city. And being able to identify and to isolate and think through and listen to and learn from these narratives will not only heal us, but they'll also transform us and move us towards the future. There was some, one of the ideas that came through this, or that I connected with, I would say more than I have before, is Black radical thought. There's a historian, Robin D.G. Kelley, and Black radical thought, basically it's a process. It's a way to generate ideas, and it's from a philosophical practice. So, going back to thinking through what led me into this, it is a way to be able to really develop a way to think about how to do public history, from what perspective, what framework, whose voice is being centered, how is that being centered, how we're connecting and interacting with the landscape, and then how we're upholding those, that collective memory that we have around these spaces, and then how is those memories being transmitted across people, across neighborhoods, how is it being shared? And that's, this way of engaging residents, with their understanding and being able to support and uplift, and also given that autonomy to say, this is significant, this is important, and I want it to be remembered ongoing. There's also a body of work and we hear about tactical urbanism, but there's also a practice of tactical preservation, and really hope to be inspired, inspire, and co-create with others this tactical preservation, so that more narratives than what we can think of at the drop of a hat will come to our minds, and that we can use them in our work. Music is really big in Atlanta, and shame on me for not putting an Outkast song, although it comes up in there are some scholarly articles about Outkast that are kind of discussed. These 2 songs really struck me, Like a King by Ben Harper, and just really reflecting on Dr. King and his work for Black lives, as well as the Black Lives Movement against police brutality, and putting those 2 together in this song, it's really phenomenal. And then David Brenner's song Magnolia. Atlanta, we're a city that's in a forest, and just to reconnect to trees in a way that's healthy when they've been used also. We have, the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, and I'm saying it out of order, but EJI is doing some work in Alabama, but also across, the country where lynchings took place, and just to be able to, reconnect to trees in a way that's healthy and holistic, because they do give us life. As my friend Neith Sankofa says, it mirrors our lungs. It's the air we breathe, and they're also very highly spiritual. So just to really think through, like, not just culture, but also how we are practicing this art of remembrance. So yeah, I am interested in any sort of questions, and any sort of questions. I just kind of went through some of my learnings, but these are some really great images. Alonzo Herndon from the Atlanta Life also had a number of barbershops. And then this picture is actually from Carver Homes. They had a Girl Scout troop, and one of the individuals that I interviewed grew up in Carver Homes. I was initially talking to him because he's a farmer, and wanted to talk with him about food systems and Black sustainability. However, we talked about Carver Homes, and so there have a few images of that, and they're building a garden, and then also Freaknik. There were several people who talked about Freaknik and just the power, not only of the imagination, but also how it empowered and also was a way to express power. It was a really good part that's maybe has had some resurgence in a little bit of ways, but large and by far, it was a part of the 90s. Many of those folks may be in their 40s and 50s now. So, but yeah, there are some, I guess I'll have this conversation with you, Miranda, about, next steps and what my plans are for the future. So.
Well, I think there's just like so many really amazing morsels of this research you're doing that has tendrils and touches like so many other important conversations that are happening in Atlanta, from gentrification to decolonization to revitalization, and just the occupancy of space in general, right? Like a lot of what I've read in your research and a lot of what you talked about specifically was about this preservation of Black narratives and Black history and Black spaces. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you have seen that working successfully in Atlanta, and maybe what is in that magic sauce that we could all maybe learn from to help foster more of these spaces and protect them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real good question. So I'll say a couple of things. I would say, one, it's important that capital, that money goes towards preservation. Preservation is not cheap. And in order for preservation to really take place and to be done well, it has to have, money. And I would say one thing, that's one reason why this was a good, some of the resources I was able to use that was helpful to like even make those chapbooks or those zines, was because there's a pot of money that go with this. So some people that I would say that are doing it well, I think, there are a couple of organizations, Dr. Candy Tate, Asala, they're doing a lot of storytelling, a lot of engagement with folks on the West Side communities. Fountain Hall, she's amassed definitely some capital for the funding to restore Fountain Hall and do some work and planning around that. Fountain Hall was a part of the original Atlanta University. It is still standing on the West Side. W. Du Bois had his office there and it continues to stand, right? So I would say that's one way. Another way is like, how do you see preservation? I have learned more about HGDC this year and just the work that they're doing around the chorus. Their dogs are walking down the street, sorry. Yeah,
No, this would not be an Atlanta talk if there wasn't dogs talking about their life experiences going on in the background.
exactly, exactly. I mean, geez. Um, oh yeah, preservation of people. They have the largest subsidized housing for residents. So if we're thinking about Auburn Avenue, like it wasn't just the history of the Atlanta life, all the churches, the civil rights movement. It's also folks that live there, have been there for years. I can't tell you how many tours that on different tours that people would like yell out and say things to us, you know, and like sharing their knowledge. It's because they've been there. And that's kind of real important because usually there's a Ujai Davis, she's a planner, but she talks about Black landscapes or early Black communities. And and basically she's saying that working communities, working people usually do not benefit from these histories. So, you know, that's a case in point. They're not the beneficiaries of that. Another place, I guess I'll conclude with this. I think that different artists, even if it's not like preservation of a material object, you know, doing murals is very helpful because we're talking about like a cultural landscape it's a collective, you know, connection. And that's one way of getting multiple people thinking about, you know, who are these individuals, whether they were washerwomen or whether it was a leader in an organization, or it was just, you know, themes from the Black Lives Matter movement over this past summer. So it all depends on how we're looking at preservation and the ways that we are moving the collective audience toward that goal. And I guess lastly and finally, at 4, I would say Auburn Avenue Research Library. You know, archives are so important. There is a term called symbolic annihilation. You know, if we're talking about historically excluded, symbolic annihilation, those things are like very much themes of thinking about libraries and archives. Who is in an archive? Who even designed the archives? Who set the archive up? And it's usually not BIPOC communities or individuals. And so to have communities that are, or say archives that are either organized by Black people or, you know, BIPOC, it's kind of important to be able to walk into an institution where you can ask someone a question and they can tell you how to find it. You know, it's not question that they're there. And they would understand some of the contribution and why they were significant, and could probably lead you to other resources within the archives or across archives, or sorry, not across archives, but across items in the archives, for lack of that word, yeah.
So like that even speaks to when you start talking about like who created the archive, like who is controlling this historical narrative, that even feeds into our contemporary senses of ownership of information in space, right? Like who is curating these spaces, who is the person telling the story. And there was a lot of empowerment in your workshop over the last weekend with Shannon. Shout out to Shannon Kimbrough at City.
Yeah.
Rock star. About talking about how people can preserve their own personal narratives. So I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about like, you know, maybe something you learned in that session from Shannon about like protecting these precious things that we have that tell us our story?
Yeah, I would say I learned a lot, and also was reminded of a few things. I have a tendency of, I am not organized and I am messy. So just even using, it's not wax paper, but there is a paper, not wax paper, but the other paper that you can use in the kitchen. What is that? Anyway, using that in between like your pages, right? Of photographs. She did a fold for corners for like paintings or of paintings that you want to corner, so that if you're putting it into between two pieces of cardboard to keep it straight from being bent or damaged, that you do not want it to touch something that's acidic, so that it can stay, you know, nice and the way that you put it, the way that it was originally designed to look like, and not have any sort of deterioration. And just periodically cleaning things like your metals, like if you have a tea kettle or a spoon, like that one spoon from your great grandmother, like, or that was in your baby items, like those things are important. And she had another example of teacups. I have some teacups from my grandmother, and they're sitting on the shelf, but if I did decide to handle them, I should be careful about where I hold them, and how I handle them. So handling things with care. So yeah, I think I would want to do that one more time.
Maybe a collaboration between you and Shannon in the future on the next zine, like how to take care of the family Bible, how to take care of all those old photos.
Well, actually, and I have some for you and Chris. So her slides are in, she had a series of slides, and it goes through, I mean, it's like 50 something pages, but if you can see, it is, so her stuff is included inside of our book.
Oh, that's so cool. I cannot wait to get my copy.
Yeah.
So where can folks get a copy of the amazing zine, and where can they find you, and what will you be doing next?
Yeah, good call. You can email me, civilbikes@gmail.com, and I can email you this. Oh, not email, sorry. I can send you this. It just has an introduction. It has some simple things you can do to treasure your family's heritage, how to preserve like physical materials, how to repair physical materials, and then some common house types in Georgia. So looking at from shotgun houses to craftsman houses, both Victorian. So just to give you some idea of the architecture that surrounds us, that's in the city, that's changing as well, just so we all know what's here and why it's significant, where it comes from, what the designs are, what are those elements of design, and then also has some upcoming events. So website is www.civilbikes.com. It will be updated soon with some of our next events, and it's just our pop-ups. So we're hoping to pop up sooner on the Beltline, again on the Beltline, from between now and next year May. So we'll have at least 6 more. And then we'll do some of these that 4-part series workshop online too. But we'd love to do, an outdoor classroom.
Awesome. Oh, I love it. Well, Nedra, it has been an absolute pleasure to work with you over the last year, and I'm so excited about what you're doing next. Yeah. Make sure you guys follow her on social, check out the website, order your zine, do all of the things to support Civil Bikes, go on a bike tour. Nedra does an amazing job. If you have any questions, you can always reach us at the Beltline, and we'll be happy to direct you to Nedra. And if you have you want to get involved, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. My email is mkyle@atlbeltline.org. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And Nedra, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sarah and Cedric, for joining.
Take care, everyone. Good night.
Good night.